Thank you. Thank you, Chair Murray.
Senator Paul.
Dr. Fauci, we don't know whether the pandemic started in a lab in Wuhan or evolved naturally, but we should want to know. 3 million people have died from this pandemic, and that should cause us to explore all possibilities. Instead, government authorities, self-interested in continuing gain-of-function research, say there's nothing to see here. Gain-of-function research, as you know, is juicing up naturally occurring animal viruses to infect humans. To arrive at the truth, the U.S. government should admit that the Wuhan Virology Institute was experimenting to enhance the coronavirus's ability to infect humans. Juicing up superviruses is not new. Scientists in the U.S. have long known how to mutate animal viruses to infect humans. For years, Dr. Ralph Baric, a virologist in the U.S., has been collaborating with Dr. Shi Zhengli of the Wuhan Virology Institute, sharing his discoveries about how to create superviruses. This gain-of-function research has been funded by the NIH. The collaboration between the U.S. and the Wuhan Virology Institute continues. Doctors Baric and Shi worked together to insert bat virus spike protein into the backbone of the deadly SARS virus, and then use this man-made supervirus to infect human airway cells. Think about that for a moment. The SARS virus had a 15% mortality. We're fighting a pandemic that has about a 1% mortality. Can you imagine if a SARS virus that's been juiced up and had viral proteins added to it, to the spike protein, if that were released accidentally? Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, with all due respect, you are entirely and completely incorrect that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute
Do they fund
of
Dr.
Virology.
Baric?
We do not fund.
Do you fund Dr. Barrick's gain-of-function research?
Dr. Barrett does not doing gain-of-function research, and if it is, it's according to the guidelines, and it is being conducted in North Carolina, not
You don't think
in
inserting
China.
a bat virus spike protein that he got from the Wuhan Institute into the SARS virus is gain-of-function?
That is
You would be
not-
in the minority because at least 200 scientists have signed a statement from the Cambridge Working Group saying that it is gain-of-function.
Well, it is not. And if you look at the grant and you look at the progress reports, it is not gain of function, despite the fact that people tweet that,
So
they
do
write
you still
about it.
support sending money to the Wuhan Virology Institute?
We do not send money now to the Wuhan
Do you
Virology
support
Institute.
sending money? We did under your tutelage. We were sending it through EcoHealth. It was a sub-agency and a sub-grant. Do you support that the money from NIH that was going to the Wuhan Institute?
Let me explain to you why that was done. The SARS-CoV-1 originated in bats in China. It would have been irresponsible of us if we did not investigate the bat viruses and the serology to see who might have been infected.
Or perhaps it would be
in China.
irresponsible to send it to the Chinese government that we may not be able to trust with this knowledge and with this incredibly dangerous viruses. Government scientists like yourself who favor gain-of-function research.
I don't favor
maintain
gain-of-function research
that
in
the
China.
disease
You are
arose
saying
naturally.
things that are not correct.
Government defenders of gain-of-function, such as yourself, say that COVID-19 mutations were random and not designed by man. But interestingly, the technique that Dr. Baric developed forces mutations by serial passage through cell culture that the mutations appear to be natural. In fact, Dr. Baric named the technique the no-see-em technique because the mutations appear naturally. Nicholas Baker in the New York Magazine said nobody would know if the virus had been fabricated in a laboratory or grown in nature. Government authorities in the U.S., including yourself, unequivocally deny that COVID-19 could have escaped a lab. But even Dr. Shi in Wuhan wasn't so sure. According to Nicholas Baker, Dr. Shi wondered, could this new virus have come from her own laboratory? She checked her records frantically and found no matches. That really took a load off my mind, she said. I had not slept for days. The director of the gain-of-function research in Wuhan couldn't sleep because she was terrified that it might be in her lab. Dr. Barrick, an advocate of gain-of-function research, admits the main problem that the Institute of Virology has is the outbreak occurred in close proximity. What are the odds? Barrick responded, could you rule out a laboratory escape? The answer in this case is probably not. Will you, in front of this group, categorically say that the COVID-19 could not have occurred through serial passage in a laboratory?
I do not have any accounting of what the Chinese may have done, and I'm fully in favor of any further investigation of what went on in China. However, I will repeat again, the NIH and NIAID categorically has not funded gain-of-function research to be conducted in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You do support it in the U.S. We have 11 labs doing it, and you have allowed it here. We have a committee to do it, but the committee has granted every exemption. You're fooling with Mother Nature here. You're allowing superviruses to be created with a 15% mortality. It's very dangerous. I think it was a huge mistake to share this with China, and it's a huge mistake to allow this to continue in the United States. And we should be very careful to investigate where this virus came from.
I fully agree that you should investigate where the virus came from. But again, we have not funded gain-of-function research on this virus in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, no matter how many times
you're parsing
you say
words.
it.
There was
didn't happen.
research. There was research done with Dr. Shi and Dr. Barrick. They have collaborated on gain-of-function research where they enhanced the SARS virus to infect human airway cells, and they did it by merging a new spike protein on it. That is gain-of-function. That was joint research between the Wuhan Institute and Dr. Barrick. You can't deny it.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Senator Collins.
Thank you. Dr. Walensky, I used to have the utmost respect for the guidance from the CDC. I always considered the CDC to be the gold standard. I don't anymore. And I want to give you 3 examples where I think the conflicting, confusing guidance from your agency has undermined public confidence and contradicts the scientific guidance of many experts. The first has to do with school openings, an issue that we've talked about before. The New York Post reported that a powerful teachers union, the AFT, successfully secured changes verbatim in draft guidance on school reopenings. This came about because of an outside group that did a FOIA request that revealed extensive interactions between the AFT and the CDC. This has been described by Dr. Monica Gandhi, a professor who has written extensively about the coronavirus, as very, very troubling. She's referring to the emails back and forth between the CDC and the AFT. And she says, this is not how science-based guidance should work or be put together. My second example is from a New York Times story that appeared today. It talks about CDC guidelines on mask wearing, and where the CDC announced that less than 10% of COVID-19 transmission was occurring outdoors. The article points out that this is, quote, almost certainly misleading, and goes on to say there is not a single documented COVID infection anywhere in the world from casual outdoor interactions, such as walking past someone on a street or eating at a nearby table. The third example has to do with new guidance the CDC has issued for summer camps. And here are the reactions of 2 experts. One, a pediatric immunologist at Columbia, referred to the recommendations as, quote, senseless. The editor-in-chief of the Journal of the American Medical Association Pediatrics called the guidance, quote, unfairly draconian. So here we have unnecessary barriers to reopening schools, exaggerating the risks of outdoor transmission, and unworkable restrictions on summer camps. Why does this matter? It matters because it undermines public confidence in your recommendations, in the recommendations that do make sense, in the recommendations that Americans should be following. I'd like you to respond to why the CDC is not following the standard procedures, why it's having offline secret negotiations with one stakeholder that was revealed only through reporting and a FOIA request, why it is exaggerating outdoor transmission. We know that masks make a big difference indoors. They don't outdoors.
Thank you for that question. Maybe if I could take each of your examples one by one. First, the school guidance. As a matter of practice, the CDC engages with stakeholders, with consumers who take our guidance, who use our guidance before it is finalized so we can understand whether it addresses their needs. For our school guidance, we did that with 50 different stakeholders, over 50 actually. I personally engaged with both parents and teachers and many different stakeholders to address what could be done to improve the draft guidance we had. One of those stakeholders recognized that in our guidance we had addressed what you do if you have immunocompromised children at risk of severe disease, but we had neglected in our draft to address what happens if you have immunocompromised teachers who are getting chemotherapy, who have immunocompromising diseases. The request was that we add some language for what happens if you have immunocompromised teachers and how they should behave in school. That is what we did. We used CDC-based science to make that addition, but the request was to address what happens if you have immunocompromised teachers, and that was an oversight in our initial draft, and we included a science-based response, or a science-based language in our guidance.
Madam Chair, I would just ask unanimous consent that the full New York Times story dated today be placed in the record because it answers, I realize I'm out of time, it answers Dr. Walensky's response.
So ordered. Senator Kane.
Doctors, thank you all for being here. I approach you now kind of as a physician who's done research in vaccines as much as more so than I'm approaching you as a senator. I was struck, and by the way, I'm incredibly frustrated. And the American people are frustrated because they hear you're following science, but then they just have a sense that the lag time between the implementation of that and recommendations is far too long. It's not just the American people, I'll put it this way, not just the people in my state. Here's a stat article, CDC, slow, cautious messaging seems out of step with the moment. Want to go back to the office, don't wait on the CDC, that's from Wall Street Journal. And the liberals who can't quit lockdown from The Atlantic. So first, I was struck when Senator Burr suggested that previous immunization actually confers immunity. Do any of you agree with that? Dr. Fauci?
Does previous immunization confer immunity?
Does previous infection confer immunity?
It does. We don't know what the durability of it is, but it certainly does confer
Now,
immunity.
but we still recommend that they be vaccinated.
Yeah, we do.
That seems out of step.
No, actually, Senator, a study has shown very clearly that if you vaccinate someone who has previously gotten infected and recovered, the level of neutralizing antibodies and T cells are extraordinarily high, not only against the wild type virus, but also against the variants.
I'm aware of that research. I've pulled some of that research that refers to that.
Right.
My concern is that that would happen if you had another infection. All the immunization does is mimic a pre-existing infection. That is very well established with other viruses. No one has not established it for this virus. And indeed, some of this research shows that within 4 days, which is the window period, if you will, for an infection to become an illness, those antibodies rise quite precipitously. but we still recommend that they get 2 doses, even though the same literature shows that there is an increase in side effects when someone gets a second dose and they've been previously immunized. So, now not life-threatening, but nonetheless an increase in side effects. But nowhere do I see a recommendation that, well, don't get the second dose because the literature shows that after 1 dose you've topped out your immunologic response and you're at an increased risk with the second dose. Would anybody like to speak to that?
So there are studies ongoing to look at the first versus second dose. I agree with you. It is a very reasonable proposition for study, but the purpose of immunizing somebody who's been infected previously is to develop higher antibody titers. Those high antibody titers are what is so critical in preventing
If I may, again, the studies and other viruses show, hopefully we have research showing here, but it appears to, that a reimmunization merely mimics what would happen if somebody were exposed to the virus. All it does is kind of mimic that which would occur.
Senator, this is a different virus. Each virus
It is a different
has its
virus.
unique
Dr. Marks,
issues.
is there research going to explore that which I'm referring to? Because the research so far shows that within 4 days you get a significant increase in antibody titer.
There's research that's been done to show that after vaccination, the nature of the immune response gives sufficiently high titer antibodies that the post-vaccination immune response
That's with every virus. That is not unique to this.
is likely superior to natural infection, in this case, in preventing against some of these variants. And I think that's what Dr. Fauci was getting to.
And I'll also point out that the vaccines themselves, and presumably the previous infection, is also effective against the variants. By the way, can people go back to work if they've been vaccinated and not wear a mask, assuming they're not immunocompromised?
We have about a third of people in this country who are vaccinated. We have about a third of counties in this country that still have over 100 cases per 100,000. We are working to review our guidance and to update our guidance. We have put out 3 different
I'm
guidance.
sorry, let me just ask again. If I'm vaccinated and I have antibody and I'm exposed to somebody else, what is my risk of coming down with symptomatic infection?
5%.
5% if no, that's overall. Not if I've been vaccinated and if I have antibody. That's if I'm vaccinated overall. Correct. If
I don't
antibody,
think we have data in what you're looking at. We did not check antibodies on everybody who was vaccinated.
But we could.
We absolutely could, but
could.
to date, we only have information
And we do know
about
that
5%.
if we're in if we know that critical mass or if we know that herd immunity is somewhere north of 60 or 70%, if we go into a workplace where within that workplace there is 100% immunization, such as here, we've achieved herd immunity. Yeah, there's somebody in here that may not be responding to the vaccine, but because everybody else has, they're protected. That's nowhere reflected. And right now we have federal agencies, which we've had employees not working for a year because the union says that they have to have special workplace precautions for them to return to work. There is consequence to this kind of delay, as the stat article shows, of the kind of updating of these recommendations. The American people are incredibly frustrated. And as Senator Collins says, they're beginning to disregard what you say that's true. Because what you say, so much of what you say is patently not true. I have to wear a mask when I'm outside and the wind's blowing at 20 miles an hour. That's been changed, but it was only changed recently. They seek not to believe those things which are true. You gotta realize, you gotta be more real time. Let me finish with this. I don't know if it was a stat article, the New York Times, that pointed on the HIV epidemic. The recommendations were much more kind of calibrated to real life. Listen, we know people are going to do this. If you're going to do it, please accept this recommendation. This is a blanket. Walk outside and wear a mask. You're vaccinated and everybody else is in the room is vaccinated, but you're wearing a mask. The American people have just lost patience with us. But you guys, I just ask you to just kind of be aware of their frustration and get a little real time into updating these things. I'm sorry to be so frustrated. I respect you all and thank you for your service.
Dr. Fauci, do you think it's possible that COVID-19 arose from a lab accident at a lab in Wuhan, and should it be fully investigated?
That possibility certainly exists, and I am totally in favor of a full investigation of whether that could have happened.
Great. Is it possible COVID-19 is not naturally occurring?
Again, that is a possibility. I don't know if we're ever going to be able to approve that, but you always need to open up and leave all possibilities, which is the reason why I and so many of my colleagues are very much in favor of what the WHO said, that they want to go back again and take another look in there and see what was going on in that lab.
And will you commit to get this committee all the records, anything to do with any type of viral experiment, say from 2013 to the present, so we can review those?
Certainly, I would comply with any request of the committee.
Do you and others at NIH have a conflict of interest when determining if the labs and lab work you help fund should be investigated and how it's investigated?
No, I don't think it's a conflict of interest. We're very open and wanting to make sure that everything that has any question is looked into at all. I have no problem with that.
Okay. In 2013, President Obama placed a moratorium on viral gain-of-function studies with some loopholes, which you were able to use at certain times. I know we disagree. I don't know if we disagree. We can discuss what's viral gain-of-function and what isn't. But in 2017, you had a long process, and I assume it was you that decided to lift this moratorium. And during this review, my question is this. During the review, did you consider the risk of dual applications by military, terrorists, or other foreign actors?
I'm not sure what you mean by that, Senator. Did I consider applications from dual actors? You know,
I'll say it again. Did you consider the risk of dual application? That there might be other folks that would use some of the
Sure.
GOF function of discoveries that they might be used by a military,
Sure,
terrorist,
there-
or other foreign actors?
Well, in any research that we do, we publish the research. It's available for anyone to use it in any manner in which they can. That's the modus operandi of the NIH. We fund research. The research is made
Is there a
public.
national security consideration, though, in that type of decision? Thinking the viral gain of function could be more powerful than the nuclear weapons to share that information with a government
Right.
foreign actor, maybe would have been like trying to do the Manhattan Project in nuclear energy, nuclear weapons, doing it with, say, Hitler or the
Sure.
Soviet Union.
I'm not sure what you're getting at, Senator, but we don't fund research. We have committees that look at that to make sure that research that is of any potential danger is not funded. So I'm not exactly sure what your point is.
My point is there national security implications with something as theoretically lethal as viral gain of function?
Sure there is. That's why we have committees. We have a P3CO committee, which is the potential pathogen, pandemic pathogen care and observation and oversight, excuse me. And that's a committee separate from the NIH that looks at these types of grants to see if they need to be funded. So there is a considerable amount of oversight to make sure grants that are doing research that would obviously be of danger is not
So when you made the
performed.
decision to stop the moratorium on gain of function, were there national security advisors
Right.
in the room? Was there State Department? Was there Defense Department? Who were those people that might have been part of that decision?
First of all, I did not make the decision to stop the pause on gain of function. If one looks at what actually happened, we put a pause on, and I was the one that was very much in favor of that pause.
And you're
In
talking
2013
in 2013
in
pause?
2014
Okay.
to 2017. The pause was lifted because we established a committee that looked at what we called P3CO.
Familiar with it?
Right, exactly. And when that committee then was able to make decisions about granting apart from the NIH so that we would not have any decision in it, it would be a
I
decision.
got one last question I want to sneak in. I still don't know that you answered. Was there national security people in the room when that process, that someone made the decision? I think you led that decision, but we'll come back to that. Here's my last question. If COVID-19 is indeed a product of lab manipulation, can you sit here and unequivocally say the viral studies that NIH helped fund, could not be indirectly or directly related to this final COVID-19 virus.
Yeah, looking at this experiments that were done that we funded, there would not be that possibility.
Unequivocally.
Well, you know, they're talking about a hybrid virus of a mouse virus that was adapted to a mouse, that anyone that knows anything about virology would realize that that is not something that would infect a human, much less be pathogenic and transmissible.
But we helped make the mouse that had the HLA receptor that this COVID-19 was specific for, and NIH was involved in the development of that humanized mouse?
Yeah, yes, but as I mentioned in response to Senator Paul, the NIH and NIAID did not fund gain-of-function research to be conducted at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
But that's not my question. The question is, could some of the funding you did, you can call it gain of function or not, developing the HLA receptor at the mouse, I'm not sure if you're going to call that gain of function or not, probably not, but could some of the funding indirectly ended up to the contribution of COVID-19?
I'm not sure exactly where that question is going. I mean, you could do research on something as benign as looking at something that has nothing to do with it, and it could indirectly someday, somehow be involved. So if you want to trap me into saying yes or no, I'm not going to play that game.
But we need to look at that very, very deeply and consider exactly that's why you've committed earlier to sharing all the viral.
I'd be happy to share any information you would like with the committee.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
What I've been able to piece together since we started, and this is to you, Dr. Marks, and maybe Dr. Kessler. BARDA signed a contract for $1.2 billion for 300 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccine. That's currently authorized in 70 countries around the world. It's manufacturing capacity in 15 countries and 25 sites. In addition to the Baltimore Emergent Facility, 2 sites in the U.S. manufacturing in Ohio and New Mexico of AstraZeneca vaccine. So here's my question. Of the stock that we currently have on hand, which I estimate to be about 60 million doses, is all of that being held because it came from Emergent? Or in that 60 million inventory that we have today, is some of that either foreign manufactured and or Ohio or New Mexico and would not have to be held up because of the current inspection concerns at Baltimore?
Senator, I have been talking to AstraZeneca even last night. I've been talking to them regularly over the last several weeks. To answer your question very specifically, the 60 million that you referenced, all that drug substance was made at Emergent. There is another facility at Catalent that manufactures drug substance, but we've not contracted and we are not involved, and that's for global. There are 2 other facilities, one in Westchester that you referenced, that is for drug product. But everything that we have involvement is in that 60 that has been produced for that first initial 100, and they stopped at 60 because of the problems at Emergent are all being reviewed by our colleagues at FDA because of issues at Emergent.
Follow-up question: of the over 2 million doses that went to Mexico, 1.5 million doses that went to Canada, have there been any indications from those vaccines if they have, one, I assume they have been used, is there any reason to believe that they're reporting any adverse effects?
Senator Byrne, no. And those came from a time when that facility was not being used for more than one vaccine. To produce more than one vaccine, sir.
So the fact that they produce not only AZ, but J&J now makes them susceptible?
It's a matter of public record that the problem that occurred at the facility involved a contamination event between two vaccines.
Okay.
And that was the issue that we are dealing with. But I just should add that you have our commitment that we are going to work as quickly as we possibly can to get both clearance of the doses that are currently being held because we don't have clearance of the safety of those doses yet, and also to get that plant back up and running in a manner that's fully consistent with what Americans expect from their pharmaceutical products.
Okay, this question, I'm going to go to Dr. Fauci, Dr. Marks, and Dr. Lewinsky. What percentage of the employees in your institute, your center, or your agency of your employees has been vaccinated?
You know, I'm not 100% sure, Senator, but I think it's probably a little bit more than half, probably around 60%.
Dr. Marks?
I can't tell you the exact number, but it's probably in the same range. Some people vaccinated at our facility and others at outside of the facility.
Dr. Lewinsky?
We're encouraging our employees to get vaccinated. We've been doing town halls and education seminars. Our staff have the option to report their vaccination status, but as you understand, the federal government is not requiring it, so we do not know.
Okay, and listen, you're the face of why people should get vaccinated. And knowing and promoting and confidently giving numbers, percentages, I think is really, really important as we go into this last part. Now, if you tell me that there's some statute that says you can't require somebody to tell you, imagine being the parent of a school-age kid who for generations has been required to have their kids vaccinated before they could start school. And the fact that even within our health organizations, we can't require that of people, we're going to have tough decisions to make. Employers are going to make those decisions. There have been decisions already made by colleges around the country that said, if you're on faculty or you're a student, you're not coming next year if you're not vaccinated. Now, they have the ability to do that. These are tough questions with even tougher answers, but if we're going to get that last mile coverage, we're going to have to start portraying that we're willing to do to ourselves what we're asking the American people to do. Dr. Walensky, I think it's safe to say that the 21st century is something that CDC has not totally entered, but I'm confident that you're going to take them there, and especially as it relates to science and technology. My question is simple. Do you believe the CDC director should meet with private industry and innovators who have new technologies that can help modernize the CDC?
Thank you. I think I have an extraordinary opportunity as being director of the CDC during this period of time. I think that much of what we're going to need to do in public health is going to take collaboration with academia, with government, with private sector, with nonprofits. And I am looking forward to engaging in those in a transparent, open way so that we can have that dialogue and create those collaborations.
So let me go back and ask you one more time. Do you believe that the CDC director should meet with private industry and innovators that have new technologies?
I believe that we should I should be encouraging all of those collaborations, and I am relying on my senior leadership team, my subject matter experts, to engage in many of those conversations.
But not you?
If it's a subject matter where I'm an expert, I'd be happy to, absolutely.
I think in a question to your staff, they suggested that you couldn't. But I'll revisit that through my staff to yours. So I've got to say that I'm a little bit confused on the issue of CDC guidance after hearing my colleagues, Senator Collins and Senator Cassidy, about exactly who's involved in content and language. So I sent to CDC an oversight letter, and I got your response to it on 22 April. And I'll just highlight a few things. CDC uses its emergency response clearance protocol to clear items during emergency responses. This emergency response clearance is applicable to all CDC authored, CDC branded information products with content related to an active or ongoing response such as COVID-19 response. The clearance process consists of a series of formal reviews, approvals by relevant CDC subject matter experts, SMEs, and agency clearance officials. This typically consists of content development and review by CDC's relevant COVID-19 response task force, their SMEs, followed by additional review coordinated by CDC's Joint Information Center. At no point, given the opportunity, did the letter mention anything about people outside of government. It could be parents, it could be the National Education Association. It basically said this all happens within government. Now, that's not what I heard my colleagues say as it related to the guidance on schools, that there was input provided by outside entities. And as a matter of fact, I went ahead and pulled all the email chains that I think was accessed by the media outlets that made them write this story. And I'll just say that it's a little bit alarming because it's all done on a timeline, and it suggests that AFT leadership, not sure what the issue was they raised, but they certainly changed the language of the guidance, because there's actually email that thank them for the language that they provided. And when you look at the timeline between that and White House announcement, one would have a hard time believing that everything went through a clearance process that was described in the oversight response letter to me. So I'd ask you to clear it up for me, if you would.
Thank you for that question. So as I mentioned to Senator Collins, prior to our putting our guidance through a formal clearance process, we do an enormous amount of stakeholder engagement to ensure that the guidance can actually address the questions asked. In fact, I can tell you on the other side, when I was a healthcare provider at Massachusetts General Hospital, I would frequently call my colleagues at the CDC and say, we need guidance on X. It needs to address X, Y, and Z. In this stakeholder engagement for the schools, we did outreach with over 50 organizations. We spoke to teachers, we spoke to parents, we spoke to superintendents, we spoke to many different stakeholders to understand what it is that they needed from our guidance. As I mentioned previously, in doing so, we recognized in meeting with the teachers that we had actually failed to comment on what happened if teachers were immunosuppressed, if teachers were undergoing chemotherapy, if they had a family member with a transplant at home, how we were going to engage and provide guidance to those. It was the CDC scientists that provided the guidance, that provided the science around what we should do. It was the request from teachers to say, you didn't address this issue, and we hadn't.
So the first contact by AFT with your staff was on February 1, Monday, February 1, and your staff person wrote, we were able to review a copy of the draft guidance, Trautner with the AFT, we were able to review draft guidance documents over the weekend. We're able to provide some initial feedback to several staff this morning about possible ways to strengthen the documents. That's on February 1 in the morning. On February 2, your staff emailed to you that they had followed up with suggested language on accommodations per exchange. And on February 3, at a White House press conference, you say schools can reopen without teachers being vaccinated. Would one reading this be concerned with this timeline and what the oversight letter told me was the protocol that you went through to have guidance signed off on?
So in the February 3rd press, first of all, in the February 3rd press conference, that was before our guidance was released. That was speaking to science and studies that demonstrated that schools had effectively reopened without teachers being vaccinated and keeping students and children safe. February 3rd predated our guidance release, which I believe was February 12th, although I'd have to confirm. You may recall at the time that in the media I took quite a hit for commenting on that from teachers themselves. They were not happy with me at the time.
And with the success of AFT, then NEA engages you, and you actually committed to do an NEA town hall meeting. Is that right?
We were engaging at the time with over 50 organizations, teachers, superintendents, parents alike, at the time when our school guidance came out, as a matter of practice and in an unbiased fashion.
Well, Madam Chairman, I'm going to ask that the letter and the emails be included as part of the record.
Without objection.
I only make this observation that I hope you can understand why members express frustrations on guidance that there's a chain of information that suggests people had a preferred access to not only advice, but actual language that went into the guidance. I know what your answer to my last question is going to be because I've stated it in one of the emails. Should CDC guidance suggest that all states should require teachers to be vaccinated?
I would encourage all teachers to be vaccinated. We spent the month of March providing vaccines through our federal pharmacy programs, and we got over 80% of our teachers and educators vaccinated through that process. So I am certainly encouraging that all teachers be vaccinated. I think that the guidance with regard to mandatory vaccination in schools is going to have to be done at the local level.
Would you provide guidance that suggested to schools that they vaccinate teachers?
We have been encouraging vaccination of teachers.
All teachers?
We have been encouraging vaccination of all teachers, of all educators, of all parents, of all students.
Is that in guidance?
I would have to confirm because I don't know whether our most recent updated guidance for schools actually had widespread availability of vaccine.
Okay. The chairman's been awfully kind to me, and I'm not trying to pick. As I said when I started, the next several months are going to be extremely tough at getting people vaccinated. I don't want any of us to lose focus on what the mission is out there. I know for all of you, I'm stating the obvious, that we've got to stay focused on vaccines. But the confidence the American people have in you is a lot of what's going to make us successful. As Dr. Fauci and I have talked many times about, thank God we had in place an architecture that we perfected over the last 20 years that allowed things to happen organically, like EUAs and this type of thing. It wasn't because we experienced anything. It's we went through little red flags, H1N1, SARS, Ebola, where we looked at it and said, boy, if this had been the big one, what would we have changed? And collectively, we went through and changed them. And we were much better prepared a year ago architecturally. And 80% of what we did was following the statutes that's out there and the authorities that were given to many of your institutes or agencies, or in Dr. Mark's case, to the FDA. And I've got to tell you that I believe what the FDA has accomplished, I never dreamed they could do. My goal now is to make sure we don't roll back, because as we move into technology platforms, that's not something that is easy to go back and do clinical trials on again if you're just looking for a new indication. But I've got to tell you that I believe that schools going back in person in the fall is absolutely crucial to getting a majority of the parents who have yet to be vaccinated. And knowing that at least by the end of this month, if we're not already there, every adult that wants to be vaccinated can be vaccinated. It's time for us to start setting the stage and paint the picture for what the fall looks like. That people can go on vacation this year and they can eat in a restaurant in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, preferably. That they can plan their summer vacation. Hopefully, in a few more weeks or days, maybe they can go to camp. That in the fall, we expect every school to be in person, short of some drastic change in the infection glide path. And next Thanksgiving, you ought to plan to have Thanksgiving with your family, an extended family, and Christmas you ought to be able to enjoy. If we paint that type of picture, I believe, David, we're going to get people vaccinated. But if we continue to fail at the trust that they have in us, making the calls that are appropriate at the time, feeling like they're influenced in any way, feeling like we're not out there where we need to be interpreting the science, we're going to fail. And we're going to fail for the American people, but more importantly, we're going to fail for the world, because the world right now is relying on us getting to that number and us providing the technology and the manufacturing capacity for them to be vaccinated. So we've got a big step ahead of us. I'm delighted that all four of you are here today. I thank you for the work that you've done up to this point, and more importantly, for the work you're going to do in the future. I thank the chair.
Thank you. That will end our hearing today. I want to thank all of our colleagues who are here. I especially want to thank all of our witnesses today. Thank you all, Drs. Walensky, Fauci, Marks, and Kessler, for joining us to update on this fight against this pandemic, and to tell you thank you to all of those who work for you and have been diligent in trying to make tough decisions in a difficult time to help protect all Americans. So thank you very much to you and to all the people that work with you. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions, questions for the record will be due in 10 business days on Tuesday, May 25th at 5 p.m. Hearing record will remain open until then for members who wish to submit additional remarks and materials for the record. The committee will next meet tomorrow, Wednesday, May 12th, to mark up the nominations of Jocelyn Samuels to be a member of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Jennifer Abruzzo to serve as General Counsel of the National Labor Relations Board, and Seema Nanda to serve as Solicitor for the Department of Labor. With that, the committee stands adjourned.